Freedom Now movement, hear me. We are requesting all citizens to move into Washington, to go by plane, by car, bus, any way that you can get there. Walk if necessary. We are pushing for jobs, housing, desegregated schools. This is an urgent request. Please join.
Though African Americans had been legally freed from slavery and elevated to the stature of citizens, many continued to face discrimination and oppression well into the 1960s and sadly even to this day. A system of legal discrimination called the Jim Crow laws was even put in place to make sure that people of color stayed oppressed. Due to this, a movement against this kind of repression had been building for a long time. Hence, throughout American history, a march on Washington was planned twice, each intended to bring attention to the lack of rights of African Americans in regards to economical and political fields. However, both times this event was cancelled, ascribable to the actions taken by the government, but the black community would not be silent any longer. Preparations began for a new march in Washington, one that they would go through with. Chaired by A. Philip Randolph and organized by Bayard Rustin, this event was estimated to attract 100,000 people. On August 28, 1963, more than 200,000 people gathered in Washington, D.C. for a political rally known as the March in Washington for Jobs and Freedom. This event happened due to the constant mistreatment of African Americans in the USA and their justified want for equality. It was designed specifically to bring attention to the constant injustice that the black community was faced with, and in addition to Martin Luther King Jr., featured performances and speeches from Josephine Baker, John Lewis, Mahalia Jackson, Joan Baez, and Bob Dylan. Having happened in a critical time during the civil rights movement, the march had a great impact. In a month after the event, ongoing demonstrations pressured the political leaders to act, and they did. The success of the march is credited with helping pass the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Together, these two bills outlaw segregation and prohibit oppressive and discriminatory practices. Overall, the March of Washington provided a model of social change. The power of this occasion inspired white and black Americans alike that were fighting for equal rights and gave promise for a brighter future. The fact that it was a peaceful march also contributed to its success. As Richard Cohen, an attorney with the Southern Poverty Law Center, stated, the violence was being perpetrated by the oppressors, not the oppressed, and that was an incredibly powerful message and an incredibly important tool during the movement. Therefore, due to the fact that the protest was peaceful, it prevented casualties and sent out a stronger message as the African American community got their point across without having to revert to savage tactics, which is what the police force at the time were doing. Instead of playing into their hands and getting jailed, they acted smartly and protested non-violently so that they could continue prospering and spread the word of equality. In the end, the march was a huge success and hosted perhaps the most well-known speech in all American history, "I Had a Dream." Presented by Martin Luther King Jr., the man originally planned to execute a different speech, but decided to depart from the script and speak from the heart. The extract you see here is the most recognized out of the entire presentation and frequently repeats the phrase, "I have a dream," hence the title of the speech. The origin of this is of extreme value as it shows the thought process of someone who has experienced racism firsthand and was present during all the discrimination. King is speaking from the heart and is showing his viewpoint, as well as other African Americans, about the oppression they had faced. The fact that this speech was given during the civil rights movement is also valuable, as there have been no influences from the generation we live in now. The speech is from a mindset of a person who lived the event, and not from someone looking back and reflecting upon it. This gives historians a clear insight on the thought process of people, especially people of color, during that specific time period. The fact that it was presented to a wide audience also shows what influenced people and drove them to act the way they did. The purpose of the source is to bring light to a huge issue, the discrimination against people of color, inspire people to keep fighting and change the viewpoint of the general white public so they understand why the oppression of black people is wrong. The purpose is to make everyone understand that they are equal. This is of value as it shows the viewpoints of the people being oppressed and exactly what they wanted to do about this oppression. The purpose of the source gives historians a way to see the means in which people would counter the harassment they were faced with and what they wanted to achieve for the future. This is evident when Martin Luther King says that he has a dream that his 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. This shows that the goal of the civil rights movement was not to make white people inferior to the people of color, but instead raise up black people so that they were equal to their white peers. King wanted to achieve a world where everyone was not judged by their appearance. The limitations of this source is the fact that the speech included a lot of hyperbole as well as metaphors in order to trigger emotions within the audience. This is a limitation as it does not give historians the actual information but instead one person's viewpoint of several events. Hence, the source is biased as it shows only one side of the entire ordeal and does not give the opinion of the general white public at the time. This is evident when King says, "Down in Alabama with its vicious racists." Obviously, not everyone in Alabama is racist. The civil rights advocate is using exaggeration to get his point across. The entire speech in general is very sentimental instead of being fact-based. The purpose of the speech is also a limitation as it aims to inform and persuade people. Hence, when performing in front of a large audience, Martin Luther King Jr. would have been more concerned with persuading people and helping them see the oppression towards African Americans instead of just being plain factual. In conclusion, the Civil Rights Movement was a movement to stop oppression against people of color in which the March on Washington played a critical part. Due to these events, the world is completely different compared to what it was in the previous century and is developing with every single day into a place where everyone is equal and where racism truly completely ceases to exist.
Oxford town, everybody's got their heads bowed down. Sun don't shine above the ground, ain't going down to Oxford.